Welcome to another edition of the SprintCarUnlimited.com Deep Dive presented by Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA. Joining us on this week's show is Sprint Car Hall of Fame driver Tim Green. Before we get to Tim, Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA is your one-stop shop on the way to the races. They have fresh-made sandwiches and subs with all the fixins, perfect for a night at the racetrack. Dottie's has everything you need in one location, including a full-service deli, wide selection of groceries, and gas. If you're looking to dine in, head over to the Hive Coffee House and Cafe for a great sandwich. There's a seasonal greenhouse on site and Dottie's Crab House, where you can dine in for fresh seafood and all-you-can-eat Maryland crabs. Head over to the corner of Canal and Bull Road in Dover, PA. Dottie's Family Market has you covered. Now here's Tim Green. Tim, welcome to the Deep Dive. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Nice being here.
No problem. So obviously a lot to talk about. You had a storied career. You've done stuff after racing. So I kind of want to jump in. And how did you end up getting your start in racing in the first place? I know your dad drove I think your dad's name was Leroy, drove a Supermodified, but was it just kind of going to the track with your dad that got you interested in racing?
Yeah, my dad never drove. He owned the cars.
Oh, okay.
He never drove. Yeah, my dad is the one that kind of got me started. He was doing that since I was a little kid, and I used to hang out in the garage and make a mess, so he had to pick that up as well as work on the car. So that's how I got started.
Well, that mess led to a lot. I mean, didn't he sell? I believe he sold his modified. Didn't he get you and your brother got you into karting? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's about right. But to tell you, I have two brothers. We're about 2 years apart between the three of us, and when we all became about 6, 8, and 10. Or somewhere around those bouts, we just all decided we wanted to race go-karts, and so my dad basically quit racing hard tops or super modifieds at that time, and got us go-karts, and we started racing go-karts all around Northern California.
Now, did you travel or anything with that, and did you pick it up quick? Were you kind of a quick study in these things?
I guess I picked up faster than my brothers did, and I wanted it to do more than my brothers did. And I seemed to obviously carry it on past, that go-karting thing. But, I seemed to catch on pretty quick. I ended up picking up a sponsorship or a internship from Gary and Linda Emick from Emick Enterprise out of California, and ended up working for them and being their test driver, and ended up winning the IKF Nationals in their go-kart out of Memphis, Tennessee in 1974. And so that's kind of started me into that deal. After the go-karts, was wanting to get into bigger cars.
What was it about racing that you liked early on and at what point did you think you'd be able to make a career of it?
I just liked the cars, and the drivers and stuff, and my dad worked for a guy by the name of Jack Gordon, who had a Ford dealership in town there, and his son raced and was very, very good. In fact, he ended up losing his life at the Sacramento Mile.
Oh,
that real bad year they had. We lost Ernie Purcell and a couple of the guys that year. It was a really bad year, and but he was on his way. He signed JC Agajanian, and Jimmy did. And I met Jimmy at the Ford dealership with his dad and my dad, and we ran our go-karts around the parking lot at the Ford dealership. And that's kind of how I got started into bigger cars and stuff. And I've always kind of wanted to do that since then because of him.
What car did you move into after go-karts, and what made you kind of move up the line?
Went into a super modified. That's what they called it, a super modified back then. It was like a sprint car, but not. It was a box tube frame, had a V8 engine, wing and all that stuff on it. But it was a heavier car, and I got into that with the guy that used to race out out at West Capitol Speedway and Roseville Speedway back in the 60s and 70s. And I got hooked up with him through my dad and got his car. We went through it, cleaned it all up, and went out. And that's how I spent my rookie year. Was driving his car, and my dad helped on it sponsorship wise and paint wise and motor wise and stuff. And that's how I got started in the bigger cars. And then I drove that for a year, and then went to another guy's car, same class, and then went into sprint cars after that.
How did you end up getting into sprint cars? Because it's an interesting story, I think.
Kenny Woodruff, he's the one that got me into that deal. Kenny Woodruff's shop was about a couple miles from the shop at in Sacramento, where I worked on the Supermodified that I was driving. And everybody knew Kenny. Kenny was very well known. And so I used to go by Kenny's shop and stand at the big doorway outside, and I didn't know Kenny. Kenny was pretty quiet. And I just stand there and look at the doorway and look inside the cars. And this I got brave enough to walk inside and talk to him. And we became kind of friends, I guess, and then I started working on his car. He's the one that basically taught me how to work on cars and how to work on them efficiently. And that's kind of where it got started. And then after, when that deal kind of came along, Jimmy Boyd was driving for him then in the World of Outlaw deal, the non-wing and wing stuff when it first started back in 1978. And that's kind of how that kind of got started. And then I waited when Jimmy Boyd stepped out of the car. When after the on the Saturday night of the Knoxville Nationals, he got out of the car. Him and Kenny got in an argument, and Lee Osborne got into it and finished the race that night. And then Kenny came back, and I was at the shop there to help him unload and get everything ready and stuff like that. And then we were just working on the car, and he just looked over at me and says, "You want to drive this thing?" And I went, "Well, And the Jimmy Gordon Memorial Race was coming up, and and so when he asked me, I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was dumbfounded, and I said, "Sure," and that's kind of how it all started.
And how old were you at that time?
20 years old, because back then you couldn't start racing until you were 18.
Oh, okay.
And so I started at 18 in the Supermodifieds, and then by the time I drove Kenny's car, I was probably 19 or 20, and that.
So you're out of high school, and where are you working at this point? What are you doing?
I'm working for my dad. He's got a body shop in downtown Sacramento, and I was working for him. Used to work for him during the summers, and then when I got out of school, I worked for him full time, learning how to do the trade. And plus, I was working on a race car and racing on the weekends and stuff like that before I met Kenny. And then I was helping him, and then that's kind of how it all started. So, but then it just kind of took off after that. I was obviously, knocked off my socks when when Kenny asked me to drive the car. He said, "This is Kenny Woodruff, right?" And Jimmy Boyd's car, and it was the thing to run.
How do you end up in Iowa? Because you moved to Iowa at that point. How does that happen? A California kid moving to Iowa, you're going to race at Knoxville. How does that all come about?
Okay, well, Kenny Woodruff bought all his cars back then from Bob Trostle. And Bob Trostle was out of Des Moines, Iowa. Kenny was from Iowa. And he grew up, so he knew Bob, and they knew each other. And then Kenny was selling cars for Bob out in California. And Bob would come out and race and bring cars out with him to sell and stuff. Bob was just building cars in his garage like he did. And so how it basically happened is when Kenny asked me to drive his car, I did, and I went to the race that night, and it was an open competition race. And I started in the back. I was second fast time, and I started in the back, and I run second. And I run second to Jimmy Boyd, who was in Ed Watson's car at the time. And so Bob and Kenny talked, and Kenny, I guess, liked what I did and talked to Bob about it. So in '78, when Wolfgang won all them races, 45 races he won that year, him and Bob came out to California to run the Western swing of the series that he was running. And Bob talked to me at Kenny's shop. He said, I talked to Kenny. Kenny told me about you and stuff like that. And he asked me, he basically told me, he said, if you want to race, you need to move to Iowa. And again, dumbfounded like I was, I said, sure, no problem. And so that's kind of what I did.
So you get to Iowa, and whose car do you jump in? Was it Kenny's?
Well, no. This is a whole nother story. I went back to Florida with Kenny to work on his car. Johnny Anderson was driving his car. It was Joel McRae was the owner, and it was Kenny's car, and Kenny was a mechanic, and the thing is, and so we all went back to Florida to race. And I just went back there to help Kenny and then get hooked up with Bob and Wolfgang. And then I was going to go from there up to Iowa, go to work for Bob in his shop. And he had a guy up there that he was going to try to get me hooked up with to drive his car at Knoxville and around that area. And so I went to Florida, and then I drove from Florida up to Iowa, laid in the back of Bob's truck on a piece of plywood and a mattress, up the 2-lane roads with all the snow and stuff from Florida into Iowa. And so here I am, 20 years old, suitcase, helmet, bag, in Iowa. Don't know nobody but Bob Trostle and Wolfgang. So, and then after that point, I went to work for Bob. I was working in his garage, shop, whatever you want to call it. I was making torsion arms and torsion stops and radius rods and all kinds of different things for Bob's cars. But he was selling K cars at the time, and his daughter Judy was welding them up. And Bob had started in 1979 with Chuck was driving for Speedway Motors at that time in the 4X car, vice grip car. And I was just working at the shop, and then these two Italian guys come in, Milo and Tony Ferrari, which most people in racing back in those days know who Milo and Tony Ferrari are. They were bands from around Des Moines. Milo had a big mobile home park, a couple of them in Des Moines, and Tony worked at a printing company, and they were very popular and very knowledgeable about sprint cars, and helped Bob out a couple of different times and different things. Plus, Bob had his own crew on top of that. And Milo and Tony came in and took a liking to me. First, he gave me a bunch of crap for being from California, because racers from California aren't any good. That's what they told me.
Ooh.
But yeah, I know. But it was all in good fun. But anyway, they took me under their wing, and Milo went out and bought a car and a motor. Didn't know me from nothing. And his brother Tony was very good with cars, and they didn't know me from nothing. And they took me to the beginning of the World of Outlaw series in 1979. We went down to Houston, Texas, to Big H Motor Speedway. We ran 2 or 3 outlaw shows. And my first outlaw show I ran at Houston, I think I ran 15th or something in the main event. Very first time I was ever there in a sprint car. And so we ran a couple more sprint car races, and Milo, got back up into Iowa and stuff, and Milo decided he couldn't travel that much. He had his family and stuff and his business, and he didn't want to travel that much. So, but what he did do, him and his brother, got me hooked up with Jim Rasmussen, who owned Jensen Construction Company out of Iowa at the time. And that's how I kind of got hooked up with them about March or April of that year. And Tony came with me to the shop and kind of met the guys, and I got kind of I helped them with their car because they didn't understand what they were doing, and I helped them with their car and got them going. And then the guy that was driving it crashed it the first night, and I got hired right after that.
Well, you did pretty
And
well right out of the gate. I think you won like 10
uh,
races, didn't you?
yeah, the very first night I ran the car, which was the week after this guy crashed it, and I put it back together. And the very first night I ran it, I was fast time, won the dash, won the heat, and run second in May. And I'd never seen the place before, never driven an automatic sprint car, so to speak, at that time, and never been on a half-mile racetrack. I grew up on quarter miles. But Tony was a great mechanic, and Kenny Woodruff, I talked to Kenny a lot, and Bob. Bob was very, very helpful. And after that, we kind of took off. Bob and Tony and Milo and Kenny were probably the four guys that were probably the most critical people for getting me started into this deal. And I'll never forget what they did. It was absolutely fabulous, and I'm just very lucky. But yeah, it was Kenny and Bob getting to talk to each other and know each other. And that's how it got started with Bob. And then Milo and Tony came along, didn't know me from nothing, and gave me a chance. And Tony went with me the whole rest of that year in '79 when I was driving for Jensen until about July, middle of July. And Kenny and Joel McRae had parted ways. And so first person they were looking for a mechanic. So the first person I called was Kenny. I called him back to come to Iowa to wrench for Jensen. And he did. And very first Knoxville Nationals I was at in '79, I was one of the only few drivers that had ever scored a perfect score to Knoxville with setting fast times, heat race, and main event, perfect score of 500 points. And I did that with Kenny Woodruff and Paul Trostle's car and Beta Brothers Motors. And I also met Ron Favors at that time too. And so I was meeting people right and left, and it was like a flash, but I did very well. Caught onto it quick. Tony had the car, and Tony and Kenny had the car going good. The motor was good, and it was almost a Cinderella deal until I broke a rocker arm in the main event that night on the final night.
Weren't you leading at the time?
Yeah, I led half of the race and was leading about a half a straightaway, and I broke a rocker arm and had to pull off. It dropped a cylinder, and Ron Schumann ended up winning the race. But yeah, it was brutal. It was pretty incredible. I was heartbroken, but God, I was also still starstruck because of what I was doing. Just 6 months earlier, I was kicking around in Sacramento driving modifieds, and now I'm racing in Knoxville, the biggest race in the country, and I'm leading the thing. So it was pretty wild.
Yeah, you were 1979 Rookie of the Year for the World of Outlaws.
That's correct. Yeah, because at the end of that year, after Knoxville, we went to the West Coast. Went to Colorado and raced, and then went to the West Coast, the West Capitol, which is my stomping grounds. That's where I started at. And driving Jensen's car, and Kenny was there, and Tony was there, and stuff, and it was the same deal. And I did the same thing again. I scored the perfect score of 500 last time heat race and main event. And then I ran fourth, I think, in the main event behind Kinzer and Sammy. And then later that year, I went to Phoenix, and I won the Western World, basically doing the same thing. And I beat Ronnie Schumann in that race. And so that's how I kind of got started. That's how I got Rookie of the Year. And then after that, that was the end of the year. And I was like, I still couldn't. I was still pinching myself. I had no idea. It was just so amazing.
Well, you go back to Iowa for 81 and 82, and you win the Knoxville Raceway Track Championships. Obviously going, Bob Trostle, huge in your career, but adjusting from the quarter miles, and we talk about this now with so many guys coming out of California and running with the World of Outlaws and High Limit and just being as successful as they are. What was it like adjusting from the quarter miles you grew up on and were used to racing, and then running a place like Knoxville It must have looked like the Taj Mahal to you.
Oh, it was. It really was. I've thought about it many times, even over my whole career or something. I just caught on to it really quick. And Tony Ferrari and Kenny made the car so great for me. We just all fit together, really good. The whole package was really good, and I just adapted to it. And I was not afraid of it. I was not afraid of the car. I'm probably scared some other people, I guess, but I was, I loved it. I mean, it was fantastic in short tracks and big tracks. The only tracks that really made me nervous was Pennsylvania, because they were the ones that you really hear about. I mean, and they're harder to drive than Knoxville is. Not Pennsylvania tracks are, to me, some of the hardest ones to drive. But the rest of the time, it just all fit. I don't really know why, but it just did. Like I said, if I wasn't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Was it if it wasn't for Tony and Kenny, being the way he was and teaching me, and Tony teaching me, I mean, it just worked out well. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything any better. You know what I mean? It was just, I stuck on every word, and I listened to what they said, and I did what they said, and it all seemed to just work. You know what I mean? So I don't know if it was one or the other, or just all three of us, and then we just kind of, then after that, into that year, when I got done, when Jensen and I parted company, because they said I wasn't winning enough races, I got hooked up with Bob. I just went back to Bob's deal, because Bob always had his own deal, but he didn't have no money to race, and have real nice motors and stuff like that. But he knew cars, and he knew setups and stuff like that around his area and stuff like that. So I drove for Bob for 2 years, and we won a bunch of races around Iowa, and went a couple of USAC. I won a USAC race in Indiana, the Harvest Classic at the end of the year, and wing or non-wing. I mean, they helped me. They told me what to do, and I did it, and I started catching on myself, and and Bob taught me about the cars and how to do it. Kenny taught me, and I just took it upon myself, and and it just all kind of, believe me, it was like, I look back at it now, and I was like, I'm totally surprised at how it worked out, but it did.
You mentioned something there about how difficult Central Pennsylvania tracks are. What makes Central Pennsylvania tracks, in your opinion, so difficult to drive?
The biggest thing is the competitors. They are fast. They know their tracks, and they have great cars, great motors, and they are absolutely fast. And just the way the tracks were laid out, and they knew the tracks so well and knew the idiosyncrasies of the tracks, it took a while to learn how to run the tracks the way they did to be able to be fast. But I caught on to a couple of them. I mean, but I had good teachers too. I mean, I was chasing Wolfgang and Swindell and Kanzer, and the Pennsylvania guys, Flynn Paxton and Keith Kaufman and those guys. I mean, I learned from everybody. Everybody that passed me, I learned from. And pretty soon they didn't pass me as much, and then but but the tracks were tough. I mean, back then with the big blocks, everybody, all the outlaw guys had small blocks. Those big blocks were built basically for the big tracks, and Paxton used to just play with us with that stupid big box of Weikerts. That thing would just chug down the straightaway, and it just drive away from and God, he was so fast, but it was just tough, and the short tracks came easier to me because I was more used to them. But I mean, the big tracks were tough because of the speed, and you had to be straight. And probably the person most responsible for that deal, helping me on that, was Wolfgang. Wolfgang used to pound it into my head about how to drive the car straight. Always lead with the right front, never lead with the right rear. And him and I became pretty good friends. And we used to play racquetball together and train together and stuff when we were on the road. And but yeah, that was he helped me too. he and I became, like I said, became good friends, and we raced good together and stuff. Traveled together for a while. But yeah, but the Pennsylvania tracks are tough, man, and the guys are tough, you know. But California deals are tough because that's a whole different style of racing. That's more of a bump and run thing, where Pennsylvania is a 130-mile-an-hour bump and run. It's not really a bump; they just run away from you, you know. So.
Oh yeah, no. Now you end up in Australia, I believe in '83. How do you end up in Australia?
Bob Trostle, again.
Common theme.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, exactly. Well, see, again, Kenny Woodruff and Bob and I became really, really good friends. You know, I mean, and I worked for him and helped him out as best I could when I drove for him and stuff. And the first year I was supposed to go down there was in '82, but I had flown home for the winter before I went to Australia, and did something stupid. Got on a motorcycle and ended up breaking my leg 2 days before I was supposed to fly to Australia. And that's the year I got married, and that's supposed to be our honeymoon, my wife's honeymoon. And so we spent our honeymoon with me in a cast and someone else going to Australia, not me.
Oof.
So Bob took me the next year, and it turned out to be a really good deal. I was very successful down there. But Bob and I built a car during the summer of that year, a coilover car, four coils, front rear, and the car was really fast, really, really good in the areas around Iowa, with some of those fairgrounds racetracks that we ran on. It was almost undefeated. And then we ran some outlaw races that did pretty well. And then we took it to Australia and did really well. Won a lot of races down there and was very successful. And he sold a bunch of cars, and you know, but ever since then, there's not been very many coil cars built because back then they were a little finicky because of the shock technology. But with the shocks the way they are now, I still don't understand why somebody's not building a coil car. But that's just me.
Well, Tanner Thorson has one, and he's coming along with it. I mean, he's had some success with High Limit.
Yeah, he's getting better. Him and Steve have been working on it, you know, and it's a little bit of a technical car to drive, but I mean, it's the way the tracks are today and the tires and stuff. It amazes me like somebody hasn't taken that thing and tried to, you know, develop it more and be better at it, because that's what those tracks were built for: smooth, slick racetracks. You know, now when they get a little bit rough, they get a little bit of a handful to drive. But I mean, other than that, but Tanner has done a very good job with them. You know, and I know Stevens ran one before too, and so that I think that's been helping him a lot. So, but yeah, but still, that's the only one.
Well, you won 11-17 in Australia, then, or New Zealand. It was New Zealand, and then you come back and you end up with another team.
Yeah, I ended up driving for
Lavelle Brothers.
the Liberal. Well, see, I'm trying to remember what that was. Yeah, I'm not quite sure on the dates. I think I drove for Lovell Brothers, and I drove for Kitty and Emery Weisenbaker out of Houston with Daryl Salsher as a mechanic. And Daryl and I had good success too. Daryl was really good on dry stick racetracks, and because I'd grown up in the fairgrounds series around Iowa, I was a very decent driver on fairgrounds racetracks when they're smooth and slick. And I had good success with him. Then I went back to California and drove for the Richard and John Lovell. They had a Coors Light sponsorship, and ran their car and won some races in California. And we built another coil car with myself and Scott McMillan, who was Duke McMillan's son. Scott and I are about the same age, and Scott is quite a fabricator. He was amazing, the stuff he can build. And so him and I built the car, took it to the Dirt Cup at Washington, and the first race we ever ran was up there. First time it ever scratched dirt was up there, and we won the whole thing. So that kind of lit a fire under everybody again, at least under me with a coilover course. So it kind of took off a little bit more, And but yeah, that was successful. But yeah, I mean, I've driven some great cars. I've driven with some great people, and I was very fortunate. But the best car I ever have had, was Virgil and Annie Owens in that Apple Annie 14 car that I drove out of California. And that was in 85, 86.
Yep, 86.
And and then I started driving for them, and drove for them for a few years, and then ended up working at his business, his machine shop, and then ended up eventually buying it and running it for a few years before I closed it. And so yeah, that was a 10-year series for me with him, with Virgil and his wife, and the guys that all own the machine. And but yeah, they were about the best people I'd ever been with, and I've been with some great people, but they were about the best. And they took good care of me. They had great cars. They were great people. And so that's kind of where, that ended up. And I drove for them from like 86 to 96, and I retired in 96. And here I am.
Well, people know you for the 14. I mean, that's the one when if you see a picture of Tim Green, it's in the 14. But you ran with them in 86. In 87, you jumped in a pavement Supermodified. And it kind of, I don't want to say it changed your life a little bit, maybe in a little bit for the worst, but you were in an accident or a crash and suffered burns. You had skin grafts, surgeries, and all of that. What made you get in a pavement Supermodified? Because you're running sprint cars at that point. And how did that what was that whole situation like? Crashing and then people actually pulled you out of the car.
Yeah. Well, I was racing for Virgil and Annie. It was the second year I was driving for him. And I built 2 cars for the season, 2 dirt cars. And we had planned on running California and go back to Knoxville and travel back there and race and do whatever else we wanted to do. And then eventually we're going to want to run a season with the World of Outlaws. Sure. With Virgil. And well, during that time, I met this guy, and he was an engineer, and he was pretty into pavement, and I was always trying to find better things, faster things that work better or whatever. And he was talking to me about an airbox, a cold air box for the injection to get the heat out of the air that goes into the motor. It's the air from the outside, except from grabbing it from under the hood. So him and I designed an airbox and built it and tested it, and it was very successful. I liked the way it worked. It was faster. It definitely gained the horsepower because it's cold air going in the motor. Right. It took a little bit of development. Well, he and I hadn't even thought about pavement before that, but he knew a couple of pavement guys, and I knew some pavement guys, but I wasn't interested in racing pavement. But he had talked to me. I told him, I said, yeah, I drive one. So he got me a deal lined up to drive a car, and there was some misunderstanding, I guess, when what happened. But anyway, long story short, I ended up going out there and running the thing, and I stuck it in the fence, and it caught on fire, and it basically burned me, lower half of my body, 40% of the lower half of my body, both legs, and up around my hips and stuff. And this is at Madera Speedway in the Valley in California. And if it had been for Billy Vukovich Jr., And Wally Pancrest, I probably wouldn't be here right now because they stopped on the racetracks, dove into the car while it was on fire because the fire crew had taken the water hose that they used at that time to wash the alcohol down away from the cars when it happened, pulled it away, and it wasn't there, so they emptied every fire extinguisher they had in the whole place out trying to get the fire out on his car. And Wally and Billy pulled me out of the car, saved my life. And I woke up in the hospital, Valley Medical in Fresno, and spent the next 4 months in there going through skin graft surgeries and debridement surgeries and stuff like that. And, and it basically, it did change my life, obviously, because of what it did. I had 30-day burns over 40% of my lower body and both legs, ankles, feet. And I think I had 14 or 15 surgeries. And anyway, I was fortunate enough that there was a guy that was on call at the hospital while this was going on. He was a captain in the military, and he was a burn specialist, and he was on call going through that hospital, and he did all the surgeries to basically save me. And I went through that deal. The nurses and the doctors there were great. They helped me so much, and the racing people, the racing community, they were awesome too. I got a lot of great feedback from everybody and well wishes and stuff like that. And that's kind of, but that was in '86. And so going through all these surgeries, and I was driving for Virgil and Annie at the time, working for them at the shop, and they took care of me, helped me out, helped my wife out. I just had my first baby, my son Nick, and so Marcy was all alone in the motel in Fresno at the hospital, and we had people that surrounded her, Burn Reeves and his wife Carolyn, and Larry Trevero and everybody those people down through that area and stuff. They all were very, very great, very helpful to me and my family. And so I made it through that. And I said that was an April to October situation. And then the very first race I came back to race was kind of a deal. I snookered Virgil into, I said I built two cars, and Jimmy started driving the other car because I was hurt. He was having a great year with my car. And but no, Jimmy was doing great. And I had a brand new car sitting there. And so I decided, I talked Virgil to let me drive the car because I was healed up fairly well. Wasn't very strong, but I was healed up. And he let me haul out the car. I told myself, all I want to do is haul out it. Just how I feel. You know what I mean? So I hauled out it. It felt pretty good. And so I talked him into let me qualify it. And I think he knew anyway. He was just kind of right. He was just kind of going along with me, And so I qualified it. Then I ran the heat race and I ran the main event with it. Well, as it all worked out, at the end, I ended up winning the main event. First time I came back. And which was great. I was so tired I couldn't get out of the car. So Jeannie came over and a couple other guys came over and drove me out of the car, and congratulated me and stuff like that. It was so awesome. And the crew guys and stuff, and and Virgil and Annie, they were so spectacular, and it just rehooked me back into racing again. You know what I mean? Because I
Right.
honestly I had thought about not doing it because I was away from it. But when I got back and I seen the cars and smelled the menthol and stuff like that, and then when I did that, I was hooked again. So it was like starting over again. But I had a second half of my career and won some more races and championships and was very fortunate. And Virgil and Annie were all part of that.
So in 1989, you go on the World of Outlaws tour again. You finish fourth in the standings. What made you want to go out there one more time or go out there another year?
Well, it was because Virgil and Annie wanted to go. and I wanted to go for them. I'd already done it, and I wanted to do it again for myself, but mostly it was just a group decision between the three of us and my wife, and we decided to try it. He wanted to try it, because back then, I mean, and still is today, obviously, that traveling was the thing that most of these car owners, as much as the drivers want to do it, most of the car owners want to do it too. You know what I mean? And so he wanted to do it, and he gave me the opportunity to put the whole program together. So I did. He gave me a checkbook and a green light. He said, "Put it together the way you want." And I talked to him about everything along the way and stuff like that while he was running his business and stuff. And we put a pretty good deal together. We won a lot of local races and stuff, so we went out and did it. And I did it with two kids. One was 18, the other one was 19. And we ended up having a really good year to speak of, you know what I mean? And I was doing all the tuning and stuff, and then making the calls and stuff, and they were doing it, and it was good. I was very happy with the way everything went. And it sparked another person to get interested in sprint cars, which was Brian Sperry, who was the kid that was one of the youngest kids that did it, and he did it with me. And I got him. He was hooked on it, and he got more hooked on it when he went racing with me. And he's ended up being very successful as well as a mechanic.
Yep.
And we ended up fourth. And then after that, we kind of, I was getting up on age and myself. My kids were getting older, and I didn't want to race I didn't want to travel and race too much when my kids were, going into school and stuff like that. And I wanted to stay home. And plus I'd always told myself that I wanted to have another career after I got done racing around age 40 and have something else where I can generate revenue for my family. Well, Virgil gave me that opportunity. After I had run his racing team and stuff, he gave me the opportunity to work at his company, and I helped in that deal. And he brought me in at a entry position and taught me some stuff and taught me how to quote jobs and things to look for and stuff like that, and introduced me to some of the guys at the shop. And I eventually ended up going into purchasing, then into operations and stuff. And then I became operations manager. And that's kind of when but when I did that, I had to kind of quit racing. Plus, I was getting to the age. I didn't want to race past 40. And I was born in '56, so I didn't want to race past age 40. So it all kind of worked out together. I mean, I couldn't have wrote the script any better for my life than all this stuff, except for the accidents that I had.
Yeah, minus the crash, man. Minus that crash,
yeah.
You didn't need that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not done yet. I still crash myself after I quit racing, but. Anyway, I did all that. And so then I retired and went to work for the company and progressed up to the company. And then Virgil wanted to retire and back off. And Annie was still kind of wanting to work, but not. So they cut their hours back. And then I eventually got into the opportunity to buy the company. And I eventually did that. Virgil passed away. And then a couple of years after that, I got into, I talked to Annie, and she was looking at selling the company. So I bought it from her. And losing Virgil was a tough thing for me. Virgil was like my dad. I mean, him and I were really, really close. And Annie too, as well. But so then I kind of did that deal. And then I've known Annie and Virgil since 1982, something like that. That's when we first got together. Yeah, and we've been friends the whole time. Annie and I are like brother and sister. And so I bought the company and ran it. Annie was still there, involved in the deal and stuff. And then I eventually had to close it because the economy was passing the company by. I couldn't keep it up. And we should have made some changes earlier, financially, with changing the way the program, the shop was run and stuff like that. But we didn't. So it eventually passed us by. So the best thing I could have done at that time was I ended up closing the thing after about 3 or 4 years. And I'm still friends with Annie today, and we see each other quite often. And but yeah, that was pretty much it. Then I quit. Last car I drove was their car in 1996 at San Jose Speedway, and so then that was that deal. And then by that time, my son was getting older, and he was running through go-karts and stuff like that. And I ended up getting a car. I bought a car from Bob Consani, a pavement car. Go figure, I get burned in a pavement car, then I buy one for my son.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
I know. That's what I said too. That's what my wife said too. But anyway, we did that, and he was good. I thought he was very, to be pretty successful. Didn't have a lot of money. I had some sponsorship behind me and stuff, and then when in the 2000s, when the economy kind of took a backwards turn, a lot of the sponsors I had to cash out and stuff like that. So I ended up selling the car and couldn't race anymore. And then, but my son was working for me at the company, and my wife was there too. And so we were just doing all that together. And then he was racing, and then we ended up quitting. And but he had some promise. I'm not sure how far he would have made, but he had some promise. And but at that time, how much money it takes now. So and it was quite a bit back then, and now it's even way worse. But it was still fun. We did it for a couple of years. And we got a dirt car, and then I just got to the point where I just couldn't do it. Work was getting busy, and I couldn't spend the time, and I didn't have the money, and so I just kind of stopped. And my son kept working for me, and so that was kind of it for me for racing.
Well, not quite yet, but from 90 to 96, from 90 to 96, you had 2 NARC titles, 2 Dirt Cups, won a Golden State Challenge title. When did you end up purchasing the business and then selling the business? Or closing?
I sold the business I closed it and sold the equipment in 2014.
Okay.
And I quit racing in 96, and then I ran the company. I was with the company, and I didn't go between like 96, 98 until 2014. I was involved with all of either as an employee or then a manager, and then eventually as an owner for a couple of years. And then I couldn't see it. It just wasn't making enough money, and things were changing in the Silicon Valley industry with this machine shops and stuff like that. And all my people were aging out, and I had trouble I was worried about new employees coming in and what was going to happen. And the whole industry kind of changed, and, the whole workforce kind of changed. It just people that were coming into the business back then weren't like they were the generation before that, or they worked hard and wanted to do the job. Things kind of changed, and like the rest of the world all kind of changed. They got to where they wanted to hand out more for money and hand out less for work, and so I just ended up closing it, and he got taken care of, and I took care of all my guys the best I could. And my son went and found his own job with another company, and put himself through trade school and stuff, and got his own job, got married, and was doing pretty well. And so then that's when I decided to kind of retire. Plus I got sick. I had a health issue that I had to take care of, and it kind of took me. My retirement made me retire a little bit earlier than I wanted to. So, but that's kind of how it worked. I worked at the company for, I said from 96 to about.
That's 18 years.
2013. Yeah. I worked at the company beginning start to finish I started in 79. No, not 79. I'm sorry, 81 or 82. Yeah, so I was like 40 years, 41 years I was at the company. And I started out as a truck driver, delivering parts and stuff. And I went into shipping, packaging, and I worked into management, purchasing, and operations and stuff. Worked all the way through there. Got to know all the guys, and had a great time. Had a great bunch of guys that worked there and stuff. And it was a great company to work for. It was just eventually the whole industry just changed and people changed, and just like it is now. It's just tough now. It really is. And yeah, I said I couldn't have written it. I couldn't have wrote it out any better if I wanted to. You know what I mean? So
Well, couple
now,
things. What's that?
I said now at this point I'm retiring, and I want to watch my kids grow up and do their things with them, do things with them. You know what I mean? So my kid was racing, and my daughter was doing her school thing, with cheerleading and all that kind of stuff. So, I was pretty involved with all that stuff too. So I have plenty of things to do.
Well, couple things that did you live in the same neighborhood as Kyle Larson?
That's a funny story too, a small world thing.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. We lived in West Sacramento, and that's the name of the town, just a little suburb outside of Sacramento. And about a block away, I met this kid, and his name was Mike Larson, and it's Kyle's dad.
Yep.
And he was interested in cars. He went to the races. He was really into it, and I was into it because my dad was. And how it all worked out was my dad had a body shop back then, so he had masking tape, rolls and rolls and rolls of masking tape for masking off the cars for paint and all that kind of stuff. So I used to hijack all the tape from my dad's body shop and bring it home, and Mike and I would build cars out of tape and old model axles and tires and wheels and stuff. And back then they used to have these throw rows that were oval shaped.
Yes.
They had oval patterns on. Well, that's how Mike and I raced. And we began a friendship back then, and when we were 4 or 5 years old, and we're still friends today. And I've known Kyle since he was a kid, and I've known Mike actually since I've known Mike for 65 years. And yeah, we're friends, and we have been for a long time. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. Then my son was racing, his son was racing karts and stuff, and then got going, and Nick got into cars, and Mike and Kyle got into cars and stuff, and then just kept going, and Kyle kept going. And unfortunately we couldn't, but Kyle's done great, and Mike and Jen, I know, are super proud of what they're doing, and Mike's a great guy. He's worked for PG&E, and yeah, Mike and I have been good friends for a long time.
Now, were you the first one to take him to the races? Did he go with you or your dad, or?
He went with us, to the races, and he got hooked on it, him and his dad, and he got hooked on it, probably worse than I did. Then him and I just kind of grew our appreciation for the racing deal even more by building the cars and tape cars and painting, and making cardboard wings and stuff, and then turned into plastic. Then he went to wireframe stuff, and he built me a wireframe sprint car of my Jensen construction car, the 55 car. It was a slot car, and I've had it in my trophy case for, 30 years or something like that. And, it's just stuff like that. And, we've been going to races together and talking about racing stuff for that long. And then when him and I always used to talk, even though we were racing in different circles, Kyle was running USAC and running all the stuff back there, and Nick was just getting into cars at that time. And, but yeah, we used to talk all the time. And Mike and I have been friends, and I knew his family. We used to stay at his family's house, and vice versa. And like I said, we lived right down the street from each other, so we were together all the time.
It was just interesting, I heard this story that you two were close, and so we can say that you helped Kyle Larson along the way get involved in racing.
I don't.
How's that?
I wish I could say that, but no, I can't say that. Kyle Kyle Larson is a one of a kind for sure. He's pretty amazing. I mean, you see those. He's a generational type driver, like
no doubt.
Gordon, Tony Stewart,
Yep.
Kyle Larson, and now Corey Day. This kid's coming up, and this kid's amazing too. I mean, it's amazing to see how these guys they all come along, and then all of a sudden, once in every generation, there's a standout, and it just pops out, and you notice him right away, and he just stays there, and that's what Kyle was. Kyle could drive anything, and does, and still does, and Mike, he wasn't interested in racing except until the time we met and got hooked up together. But but Kyle, he took to it, loves it, is great at it, and sometimes it's just funny how things work out, But
speaking out, speaking how things work out. You said about your storybook career, you couldn't have scripted any better. I wanted to ask you, you raced against the big three, which was Steve Kinzer, Doug Wolfgang, Sammy Swinell. What was it like running against them every night?
It was tough, really tough. I mean, it was, all three had different personalities. They were all three fast, all three in different ways. And I was still learning too. We're all, Steve and Sammy and I are about the same age. I think we're all around 69 or 70 now. So we all started about the same time. Sammy started a few years younger than I did, because I couldn't, back in California, you couldn't start racing until you were 18. And Sammy started, I think, at 16. But I categorized them as just by the way what they did. Wolfgang built his cars, built the motors, worked on his cars, drove his cars. Steve, he had Carl Kinzer, and Elrod, and then Sammy and the guys that worked for him, and Sammy was a car builder, a motor builder. Sammy did everything also. Driver-wise, they were all very, very fantastic. And the stuff I learned from, but I learned most of my stuff that I learned driving-wise, I learned from Doug Wolfgang, because him and I got to know each other in Iowa, and that's kind of how it was. You know what I mean? And we just kind of connected and stayed connected and stuff, and that's how he taught me a lot of stuff like that. But the three of them, all three of them were tough in their own way, but far and away, Steve Kinzer was the baddest. I mean, he was amazing. That guy could drive anything, anywhere, anytime. And just when you think you got him counted out, he goes right by you again. You know what I mean? And he was amazing. Pretty amazing. Sammy, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Sammy was rough around the edges.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah. I know. I'm trying to be nice here. But, Sammy was fast, don't get me wrong. But he had a different attitude towards that deal than Wolfgang and Steve did. I mean, Steve would just flat wore you out, driving wise, and just out manhandle you. Wolfgang could outsmart you. Sammy would do both, and then sometimes if he wasn't successful doing that, then he did it a different way, which wasn't very popular. But
extracurriculars, as we like to call it.
Exactly, yeah. But Sammy's smart, man. I mean, he did a lot of stuff that innovates sprint cars. I mean, I did a lot of it, in my opinion. I did some of the stuff before Sammy did, but Sammy got more notoriety because he was more popular and faster than I was. But Sammy's done a lot for sprint car races. He has. And so was Doug and Steve. But Steve, to me, is far and away the toughest human being I ever raced against. Absolutely. I mean, just when you think you had him, you didn't have him. And if you had a red flag with 4 or 5 laps to go and he was running fifth, you better hang on because he's going by you. So, because Carl would turn the wrenches on something and Steve would find another groove somewhere else, and next thing you know, he'd drive him right by you. You know what I mean? Wolfie would just flat wear you down. But yeah, it was But I mean, there's a lot of guys, you know, and then those three guys stood out a lot. But like, you know, Len Paxton, you know, Keith Kaufman, you know, Lee Osborne, and guys like that, Danny Smith. I mean, a lot of guys I raced with. You know, I mean, there was a lot of good guys back then. There is now, you know, and it's, you know, but yeah, it's back then. The guys that I raced against built their own cars, painted their own cars, drove their own cars, and towed them to the racetrack. Not like that today. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. In some cases, it's both, you know. But I felt fortunate to grow up in the era where, you know, AJ Foyt, Johnny Rutherford, Mario Andretti, and those guys were just ahead of us, and we learned from them, and then I think took it to the next level higher than that. And now today it's different. You know what I mean? But you know, I feel special to be able to say that I raced with those guys, because they were pretty freaking amazing. The stuff they did, and the racetracks we raced on, and the conditions we raced on, and nothing like it is today. Today, these guys today race on full tables compared to the racetracks we used to race on, you know. And it's back then it was tough, and I'm sure before me and those guys, it was tougher than even before that. You know, guys like Benthausen and AJ Foyt, Rick Burkle, you know, Gary Patterson, guys from Sacramento and area like that. Those guys that, you know, that broke ground for us guys in Sacramento to be able to do that. My brother-in-law, Jimmy Sills, same thing. You know, he came from the era just before mine, Jimmy Boyd. Those guys, I mean, Jimmy Boyd was a hero of mine as well as Jimmy Sills was when I was growing up. You know, they were only a few years ahead of me. But, you know, that it's not quite the same as it used to be, but it's still a tough deal, you know. But I feel honored to be able to say that I grew up in that era.
Well, you also have been in the pit area wrenching on some cars. Most notably, the guy who I think is the best on the West Coast now is Justin Sanders. How did that deal come about?
Interesting deal. Him and his family owned a car, and they raced Watsonville. And my son was racing. We were racing. We had a 360. We were racing at Watsonville, and Justin kept coming over to my car every night. Every time we raced there, he'd come over, look, introduce himself. Nice kid. And I think Justin was probably 16 or something like that at the time. And he noticed stuff on my car that nobody else would. You know, the wing location or the wing position or right rear arm or different things like that I did to my car that no one else did, or I did something to hide one thing to hide something else. You know what I mean? And he picked out a lot of that stuff, and he came over and he started picking my brain on things. And he's a smart kid. He's a bright kid. You know, he wasn't one of those kids where you talk to him 30 seconds in your conversation, their eyes roll back in their head and they don't know what you're saying. Justin wasn't like that. Justin's an attentive, smart kid, and he's done very well for himself. He has. And he was not easy to teach, but he was very teachable because he was smart. He's very clean about what he did, and he's a good kid. And it's showing right now, and he's doing very well for himself.
Yeah, you were part of Jovan Schultz owned a car. He was in it. It was yellow. I believe it was yellow, and it had the silver wing, and I called it the banana because it's Joe's an interesting guy.
Yeah, yes, he is. He's just like this car. He's no frills.
No, and he's successful too in what he does.
No, yeah, he does very well with what he does. I mean, if you knew the stuff that he does and how he works himself and takes care of his own stuff and he works hard. He's got a screen printing business, and stuff. So he works hard and stuff. He does a lot of work for the Semiconductor Valley. And but Joe is an interesting guy. But Joe drove himself for a while, and then he got hooked up with Justin because he saw the same thing in Justin that I did. In fact, Joe's the one that introduced me to Justin. And because I knew Joe from the old Bayman's days when he drove his own car and stuff. And we got to talk one day, and he said, he wanted me to talk to Justin. And Justin came over, I don't know, a week or so later, and we were talking when he's looking at my son's car. And Joe's car was yellow, 121, no paint anywhere else, no stickers. And he did it all himself. He was all his own stuff. And him and Justin and I, Joe came over to me one winter and said he wanted to put Justin in his car and he wanted to know if I would help him. And I was retired by that time. My son wasn't racing anymore, and I was still involved in racing, But again, back then, I'm just going to say it like it is. Kids nowadays and back then, most of the kids back then, you talk to them for 30 seconds and their eyes roll back in their head. They don't even know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? He talks about suspension and shocks and stuff like that. Well, Justin knew a little bit about all that stuff, and he did his own setups, and he drove, and he was a little aggressive, but he drove hard, and he had his own stuff, and he raced with his own money, and he hustled. He learned how to do shocks and rebuild shocks, and he did that for his business and stuff. And he sold parts, and him and Joe sold parts together, and and so we all hooked up together 1 year. Actually, a bit longer than that, but I mean 1 year, and we ran Newark and Golden State, and I was a coach, teacher, crew chief, big brother. I don't know what you want to call it, but he had a good bunch of guys that were helping him. His mom and dad were very into it. His aunt and uncle and stuff like that. A good family, good support from the whole town of Aurora was behind him. You know what I mean? And Joe, and so we put a deal together and we went racing. And I hope I taught him something. I know he taught me a lot about shocks and suspension and stuff. That's just by the stuff that he knew. And then we tried together and did different things. So he wasn't afraid to try it, like I wasn't afraid to try it. Never was. And Justin got better and better, but he was also a product of California, where you ran short tracks all the time and never ran on nothing big except for Calistoga. But then Calistoga was basically not racing. And so his big track experience was limited to like Hanford and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But which is not the same as a half mile. But it's he got really good. I did a lot of coaching with him, and we did a lot of stuff together. And I consider him and I good friends. Even now today. And Justin's very smart, and he's done well for himself. He's got he's bought himself his own house, and all with all his racing money and the stuff he's done, and his wheeling and dealing and hustling. He sells parts. He helps people. He does tune-ups and stuff like that for guys. He does a lot. Plus he became a pretty damn good relief driver too. So.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
I'd say he did pretty well in that 87 car.
Yes, he did. And and it's but the hard thing about that deal is everybody does their thing their own way. And if a driver's got his own ideas on certain things, and then a tuner's got his ideas on certain things, that's usually where you bump heads, right? I mean, so Justin had to bite his tongue a couple of times, and then vice versa. You know what I mean? But Justin's a good driver. He's a fair driver. I think a lot of guys didn't think so, but I did. I watched him drive. But see, I look different. I look at things different than a lot of people do because I used to race, so I know how close it is when you're close and when you're not close, and how you can avoid stuff and you don't. You know what I mean? And people say, "Well, I couldn't avoid them," when damn well they could have. You know what I mean? So it's but Justin's good. He knows when to run hard and when to kind of save stuff, and and he's learned a lot, and he's done very well, and I'm very proud of him. And so, but yeah, that was good. I mean, and that's kind of then I helped some other people a little bit, but that deal with once I had Justin after I had my son racing and stuff for me and stuff. And I really enjoyed that. And Justin, it was just hard after that. I got to the point where, you know, my health, I was having little problems with my health a little bit. And, but I still followed Justin the best I could, you know what I mean? And I said, he's done really well. And, in fact, I just talked to him last week. And, but yeah. And then, so I've kind of like retired from big car stuff. And now I just follow my grandkids around and they're racing cars and stuff like that. I'm doing the third generation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are you doing now? I mean, do you go to the track? Do you go to karting? Where are you at now as far as racing?
Well, I didn't go to a big car race last year. I went to one, the pavement race up in Idaho where I live. And, I moved up here because my son got transferred up to Idaho from his business job we worked at in Salinas. He got transferred up there. So, and he's got 2 kids. So I got 2 grandkids, 2 boys. And my wife told me that they were moving up there, and they wanted to move up there. And my wife said we were going up there. And I said, we are? She says, well, I am. She says, if you want to go, you can go, but I'm going up there with the grandkids. And I said, well, I guess I'm going. So we moved up to Idaho, and my son got him involved in this cage kart thing up in Idaho, and they've been doing that for a couple of years, and they're getting really good at it, you know. And my son's putting in all the work and effort and stuff like that. I can't help him very much because I got some issues with my legs and stuff like that where I don't get around real good, but it's getting better. But yeah, they do that. So I've gone to, I don't know, a dozen or so races with them. I watch them race. I watch them, you know, grow up through their challenges and their tribulations and stuff, through all that deal. But it's a lot of fun, you know. And but yeah, so we'll just see where that goes. But right now, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just chasing my grandkids.
Just enjoying life.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I got sick a couple of years ago with an infection to one of my knee surgeries. I got a staph infection, and it knocked me down for a while. And I'm still recovering from that deal. And but it is getting better. I am getting stronger. But that's about it. I was fortunate enough to be able to retire with the stuff I had from the business and racing and stuff like that. But but right now, that's what we're doing. My son's getting his kids ready to go racing again here pretty soon. The season's about to start back up again. And my wife and I are down in California. We're down here visiting Annie, which is Virgil's wife, one of the car owners of the Orange Car. Yeah, and she's going through that. She's going through a little bit of health issue herself right now, so we're helping her with that deal and stuff. And I've known her for so long, and we're like brother and sister. So she's my friend. You know, I mean, I love her dearly, and so we're here and hoping she gets better, and and we'll go on from there. Racing wise, this year, I'm just going to probably just do with my grandkids and help a couple people that I know that I'm good, really good friends with and stuff, and just trying to see where it goes. You know, the racing deal's it's changed since I did it, and it's changed since I used to help on it when I was with Justin, and so I don't feel as connected as I did. So, but that's why I'm just staying with my grandkids, because it seems to be safer for me, you know. So, because I get frustrated sometimes because
I can understand that.
I'm pretty stubborn too, you know. So, I was taught by some of the toughest guys around, between Wolfgang and Kenny Woodruff and Bob Trostle. You know, I mean, he didn't cut you no slack. You know what I mean? So I have a tough time cutting anybody else any slack. So, but anyway, but that's kind of where we're at now. You know, and I'm old age is I keep my body up pretty good in my driving career, and I'm paying for it now. But I'm still here and I'm still kicking. So.
Well, Tim, I'm glad to see you're still kicking. You've had a great career, an interesting life, and it sounds like it couldn't have worked out better for you. And I appreciate you joining us on the deep dive this week. A lot of good stuff there.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it. I was very fortunate. I had a lot of great times, met a lot of great people, and I had a couple incidents that I'd like to not think about so much, but I do, and they are a part of my life. But I've got friends that I met in racing. The very first year I went back to the Midwest, that I'm still friends with now, and we talk semi-regularly. I mean, quite often, And I've had racing friends I've had for 40, 50 years, and I'm not sure that many people can say that. You know what I mean? And so I'm very fortunate about that.
Well, again, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Nice to talk to you.
Yep. That's going to wrap up another edition of the SprintCarUnlimited.com Deep Dive presented by Dottie's Family Market in Dover, PA. Thank you very much to Tim Green for joining us on the show. A lot of good stuff there. Also, if you like the content on our YouTube channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You can purchase our exclusive daily content at SprintCarUnlimited.com. We will be back next week with another edition of the Deep Dive.